was, I remember the TikTok bill in Congress, and I know social media has a pretty big impact on youth. So my first question is, like, what is your stance on this, and like, what are your policies as towards like social media? And the second one was on the cost of living, because I know cost of living, especially in like San Diego, California, it's like almost unbearable for many.
Yeah.
So just like, what are some initiatives that you've kind of sponsored, or what initiatives are in Congress to kind of counterbalance this cost of living and kind of make it easier for most to live here?
Thank you. So I'll take the second question first, because it's the more complicated of the two. I will tell you that I'm focused on housing, insurance, groceries, and fuel. Those are four big things that, and Congress has a role to play in all four of them. On housing, we need to build across the country, not necessarily going to work everywhere in our district, but across the country, we need a few million, at least a few million new units of housing. We need to dramatically expand what's called LIHTC, the low-income housing tax credit. We need first-time homebuyer tax credit. We have to do all we can, I think, to help our teachers and our nurses and our first responders, our firefighters, our law enforcement with a program similar to the VA home loan program. I think it's a lot better. We have a goal to do it. It's called the Helper Act. It's a lot better when those folks who are so essential to our communities live in our communities, right? When the next door neighbor is your teacher or the firefighter or the law enforcement officer, I think it creates a much better sense of community. So that's housing. Insurance, I have a bill with Adam Schiff, our next U.S. Senator, called the Insure Act. It would create a federal reinsurance program for wildfire risk, just like we already have for flood risk. What's happening in our district is a lot of people, their home insurance is tripling, quadrupling, or they're not able to qualify at all. They wind up on the FAIR Act. And so for my wife and I, our homeowners insurance basically has tripled. And it's because of our proximity to what they call the wildlife urban interface. It's because the wildfire risk has gone up in great, most of our district now is considered high wildfire risk. And we now have these year-round wildfires as opposed to a wildfire season. So a bill like that would be very helpful. On fuel, I want to get as many people out of, driving, 8 mile per gallon, fossil fuel cars, and hopefully accelerating the deployment of zero emission vehicles. Not all at once. I'm not saying everybody has to give up their gas car, but over time, I want to make it easier and cheaper and more convenient for you to consider a zero emission car. And there's been a lot of pushback on that. Now it's interesting. My opponent has pushed back on that a lot. But the reality is he has a financial and political interest in having only gas cars on the road. He owns Exxon stock, and in the last election cycle when he was running for the state legislature, he was the single biggest recipient of fossil fuel money, period. $2 million from the fossil fuel industry. They don't like me so much because I call them out on things like market manipulation and price gouging. And if you look at what happened last year and the year before with the California oil refineries, Mike knows this, we have a special blend of fuel because of air quality that we can only blend at just a handful of refineries. Those refineries, I believe, and according to the data from the new Department of Petroleum Market Oversight created in Sacramento, there's plenty of evidence that they are engaged in practices to jack the prices up and to take advantage of consumers. 1 month in prices went up $1.53 in 1 month back in 2021. And then last year, one transaction in September on the California spot market increased the gas prices by over 50 cents. So I'm asking the Federal Trade Commission to investigate at the federal level potential market manipulation and price gouging going on in the California oil refineries. We talked about housing, we talked about, car insurance. So that's another interesting one. I think car insurance prices are going to come back down. That is an after effect of the pandemic. Now, this isn't me thinking this originally. This is what economists have told me. I was at dinner on Monday of last week with a guy named Mark Zandi, who's the chief economist at Moody's Analytics, a Republican economist. What he told me was that what happened is, you remember during the pandemic, the supply chain for microchips, other things was impacted greatly by that. So prices went up for all of that. And for vehicles, prices went up and supply went down. The same was true if you needed a car repair. The availability of parts, for that repair was impacted dramatically by the pandemic and by the supply chain. So the costs of repairs went up dramatically. we are still feeling the after effects of those costs having increased almost a couple years later now. So my hope is that those prices are going to keep coming, or going to be going back down. And then in terms of groceries, there's no question that the big grocery chains have taken advantage, and they have increased prices greater than would, in my opinion, would have been acceptable. And here's the difference, is that Donald Trump, he's not going to call them out on it. He's going to encourage them. We heard him on a podcast with Elon Musk congratulating Musk for firing people, right? That's not what we need. And I think you're going to have Harris and Walz who are actually going to stand up for working people and try to grow the economy from the middle out rather than just help people at the very top. Now, what was the other? Got me fired up on costs. TikTok. Okay. I don't go on it because they won't allow it on government computers or on government phones or on iPads or anything like that. So I don't get to go on it. What I will tell you is that I am very concerned about, the potential influence of the Chinese Communist Party owning TikTok. And so our bill was not a ban on TikTok, it was a divestment of TikTok. Okay, so what we want is for ByteDance to divest of that asset to an American-owned company. And I think they have until the end of next year to do it, if I remember. So that's all the bill was, but people were very, very fired up about that bill. I don't think we're trying to do anything other than, protect the consumer information of Americans, protect the personal information, privacy of the American consumer. I will tell you, as a parent of a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old, I am very concerned about the impact of social media on our young people. There's a great book called The Anxious Generation, if anybody's heard of that book, by an author named Jonathan Haidt, H-A-I-D-T. Recommend you read it. It's one of the things that led me to support and co-sponsor something called the Kids Online Safety Act, which says that you only have to be 13 in order to sign up for your own social media account. It would raise that age to 16. And it would create a duty of care on the part of Meta or TikTok or any of these social media platforms to actually be responsible for the type of content that is fed to young people. So my kids don't like that book, and they don't like that bill, but they're the only ones in their 5th and 7th grade classes, respectively, that do not have smartphones, and they're not going to get one anytime soon. They don't like that very much. But I appreciate the question. Thank you.